How's it going, guys? It's Evan again. Sorry I haven't made a video in a while. Just haven't had any real reason to. No maintenance has really needed to be done. But anyway, today we're going to do spark plugs. I'm going to go over materials and how to and all that good stuff, and we'll go from there. All right, so first things first, you're going to need your spark plugs. These spark plugs are Champion brand, which is what Evinrude recommends. QC8WEPIA. And they're Champion brand. This is what they look like if you're curious. These spark plugs, as per Evinrude's manual, need 28 hundredths of an inch gap or 0.76 millimeter gap. I have two different gapper tools here just to kind of show you what they look like. You can get them at any auto parts store for $1. Anyway, I like this one. It's got a millimeter on one side and inch on the other, so you can kind of pick and choose how you want to measure it. When gapping your plug, you want to go, here, let me set this down. It's not exactly how I do it, but just for demonstration. So I said 0.76 of a millimeter here, and you just want that gap in the plug to barely clear that wire. Just barely. If it's too loose, you need to push it down. Just push it on something to close that gap up. If it's too closed and you need to spread it a little bit, just use this little pry tool on the end of it and open it up a little bit. Anyway, another important thing with these plugs and how Evinrude wants you to do them is there's something called indexing. And what indexing is the gap of the electrode here. So you see the elbow, and then you have the actual node, the electrode part here, that pointing, there's a gap, right? That lines up facing me right now. This will be facing away from me, right? So say this bottle right here is my injector. Evinrude says inside the cylinder head, we want the spark plug facing the injector, right? So you have to make sure that when this is in the motor, that it is turned facing the injector. That's called indexing. What's cool about these plugs and the G2 engine, the G1 version, you couldn't do this. You had to physically index them. On this one, Evinrude says they're self-indexing. So that affects how you would tighten them. Typically, you'd have a torque spec, or they'd say 20 feet-pound on a spark plug or whatever. What Evinrude says for these is to put them in the motor, screw them in hand tight, right? So not bearing down, just hand tight, and then you put your wrench on it and go 180 degrees from hand tight. So we'll see how that works out. They don't have a torque spec for it, so I've never done plugs like that. I've always had a torque spec. But anyway, put them in. Once you get hand tight, go 180 degrees with your wrench. So if my wrench is this way, I'm going to want to turn it till it's that way, right? 180 degrees. And that should index the plugs and give you correct torque. I'll also put a little Sharpie line on these, right? Just so I can see where this gap is. Once this is in the motor, I can still see that line that lines up with the gap down here. And that tells me what way the plug is pointing inside the cylinder head. And I just did that just for my peace of mind. So if one plug is all jacked up facing out this way and I need it that way, right? I can say, okay, well that didn't work right. Let me give it a little more and face it the right direction, right? So anyway, that covers the indexing stuff and all that, and that's kind of hectic. I think as you watch me do it, it'll be a little easier to understand. Another really important thing is something like no-ox, like this, or anti-seize, which are the same thing. They're like a zinc-based paste, and what it does is you put it on the threads here, and as you go in, the different types of metals and salt water and heat and pressure and all that stuff that these plugs are under will sometimes seize these up inside the head. And that no-ox or anti-seize just prevents that from happening. It keeps these threads from binding up and potentially snapping off when you go to take them out in 2 years or whenever it is you do your next service, right? So just good insurance there. Next thing you're going to need is dielectric grease. And everything I'm telling y'all is stuff that the Evinrude manual actually specifies. So this is dielectric grease. Dielectric grease is just a clear paste, kind of looks like Vaseline. And you put it right here on top of the head, and that keeps moisture and corrosion from building up, you know, from your spark plug wire to your spark plug. Just keeps that connection good. Other than that, socket wise, it's a 5/8 standard 5/8 spark plug socket, and a little like 3-inch extension, and that's about all I got, guys. That should be everything you need. Obviously I have 6 plugs because this is a 6-cylinder motor. And other than that, next thing we're going to do is take these covers off. I already got the pretty covers, but you don't necessarily have to take them off to get in here and work, but I'm just a believer, like, man, just get the stuff out of the way. It's little screws and stuff, you know, it's nothing crazy hard, and it'll make your life much easier. And honestly, I like to take the extra time just so I can make sure when I'm putting these in, I'm not cross-threading them, I'm not doing anything silly, because if you cross-thread one of these or strip them out in the head, you have real problems. And I literally, one of my best friends right now is having to get his head rebuilt on his boat because he stripped one of these out inside there, and that's no bueno and very expensive. Now that I got the covers off, all that good stuff, it is much easier to work on. On this, I guess it would be the port side, which would be like driver's side in the vehicle, right? Anyway, if you notice, these coils here are bolted in on the injector, so you got to undo these. I'm using a 5/16. It's not the perfect size, but it will get the job done, and you're not going to strip anything as long as you're doing it by hand. Anyway, loosen it up. So anyway, you get the injector off and you just kind of roll it back out of the way. See how I just did that? Nothing too crazy. And it gives me all the access now to that plug to make life much easier on you. So anyway, I'm going to do it up here and we'll get on to the plugs. All right, so as you can see, we got all the coils undone and just kind of laid to the side so I can get to the plugs back here. So we're going to start with this one. We'll just pop it off. You can see it's got a little tab there. Yep. There's one out of the way. And also, this is why that dielectric grease is so important, is because you can see that corrosion trying to build up in there, and that's what keeps that connection to your spark plug good, is this little white looking grease that's on there. That's called dielectric grease from the factory. So you get your own and throw it on there. So anyway, I'm going to pull all these out and we'll go from there. All right, sorry, I know that's not the best angle, but all I'm doing is removing the spark plugs. So I just got me one of these little Harbor Freight 3/8 ratchets, I'm sorry, with a 5/8 spark plug socket. Go in there, get her on, break her loose. Now, what that just felt like to me is maybe 15, maybe 20 foot-pounds torque. They're not extremely tight in there, so that tells me if theirs aren't, yours don't need to be. So don't go in there going crazy on it, you know what I mean? Because that one only had a little bit past tight on it. Let's get it out. And here's what I'm going to do while I go. I'm going to pull them out. Yeah, it's just ready. I mean, I don't see anything wrong with it. Just looks ready. Oh, and y'all want to see something? I was talking about indexing the plugs. Well, how about this? From the factory, look at that line on that plug they put on with the Sharpie, just like I did. So they index these from the factory. And if they're double checking themselves, you should double check yourself. And if you notice that line, which is this line right here, see how it lines up with the gap in the plug, is facing directly dead center on this injector here. So you see that little circle stamp on the injector right there? That's where that thing is pointing at, and that's where you want your gap pointing at. And they did that to every plug. This motor's never had the plugs done. So just something, I didn't think they would have done it, because they do say they're self-indexing. But why would they, if they were, and they were good at self-indexing, why would they do that from the factory? So something to keep in mind, guys. Go ahead and index your plugs and just make sure that when you get them tight, they're facing at the injectors. So I'm going to take my new plug here. Let's see if I can show you all this. I'm going to take my new plug here, and I'm going to take some of this no-ox, this stuff right here, or anti-seize, whatever. And you just want to put a little bit on the threads. Let's see, there we go. Okay. That's all you need, just a little dab, and just kind of run it down the threads with your finger, like that, right? So as you screw that in, that's going to work its way in there, and that spark plug won't seize on you. Make sense? All right, so let's come over here. And the easy way to do this, sorry, I'm having to balance my phone every time I want to show y'all something. The easy way to do this is take your spark plug socket off your ratchet, throw that thing in there like that. Remember I said it's got magnets, it won't fall out. So once you got it in there, we're going to come back over to the hole, which is right here. And you always do this by hand. Don't use any tools, any leverage. I'm talking use your fingertips, right? Because this is where you can really screw some stuff up if you cross thread this and get too tight on it. So use your fingertips to tighten it in there. Go nice and slow. I'm not forcing anything. You should never have to force it in there, right? So screwing it in, it's going fine. And then we'll see. So Evinrude says hand tight plus 180 degrees. So there's hand tight right there. Sorry, I had to put the phone down just to make sure I had it hand tight, because I don't want to screw mine up showing y'all something, you know what I mean? No offense. But anyway, so I got it in there, what feels like hand tight, right? And then I'm going to take my ratchet. We're going to get on here. Okay, 180 degrees. There's about 3/4. There's the last quarter. Let's see where she lines up. Not quite there. Here's what we got going on. They tell you to go 180 degrees from hand tight, right? So I went what I felt was about 180 degrees. And if you look, my indexing line is not lined up yet with my injector. So I'm going to take the time to put that line dead center on the injector. So the way this feels to me is once you get it hand tight in there, right, give it your best judgment to 180. Take your socket off and check your line, and make sure your line is facing your injector. If it's not, it should be fairly close, and just work it until it gets facing the injector. All right, so as you can see on the port side, aka driver side, I got all the plugs in, and my indexing lines are lined up with the injectors, right? All three lined up with the injector. I know they say you shouldn't index them, but the factory ones I pulled out had indexing lines, so I put my own. And that's how we're going back, just like they did it from the factory, right? So anyway, next thing I'm going to do is take my dielectric grease here. And you'll see, just give it a little squeeze. There it goes, put a little on there. Now I am going to go ahead and hook my spark plug wires back up before I put my injectors back on. So you can see, I just put it back together the way it came apart. Put all the injectors back on. Made sure my boots are all in place before I put these on, so I have plenty of room to work. And that's it for the port side. And the good news is that's the hard side. This next side is easy peasy. You have a straight shot right at it on all 3 cylinders here. So we're gonna repeat the same process and we'll get back with you. All right, so I just wanted to show y'all, Evinrude says they don't need to be indexed, right? Well, the factory installed spark plugs have a Sharpie mark on them, just like I put on mine. If these did not need to be indexed at the factory, there would be no reason for this Sharpie line. So what they're trying to do is show you that the gap of the spark plug is facing towards the injector. So here's what I got here on mine. I indexed it here. I know they say go hand tight and then 180 and all that. That is not correct. You want to make sure that this gap is facing the injector. So go hand tight, give it about 180 degrees, whatever you know, somewhere in there. And so that would be a half turn, and see where your line is and finish her out the rest of the way until that line is facing at the injector. So I'm going to show you right now what I'm talking about. So I'm going to take my no-ox or anti-seize, keep that spark plug from make that spark plug want to come back out when we're ready next time. Put it on here. I'm just using my socket in my hand. Come over to my hole here. We're just going to hand screw her in real gentle. Don't force anything with a spark plug like this. You'll strip that head out and then you're up a creek. So I'm just going by hand, and they're long-winded, so it takes a second. So here. All right, so that's roughly hand tight, right? That feels about. My hands are super greasy, so hand tight's a little weaker than it usually would be. I'm gonna throw on my ratchet, and I'm gonna go 1. There's about half or a quarter turn, or so I guess that would be 90 degrees. And there is 180 from hand tight roughly, right? Well, that time it actually worked out. See the other side it didn't, but you see my Sharpie mark is actually lined up pointing at my injector here. So Sharpie mark, get all this stuff out of the way. Sharpie mark pointing at injector. So that one actually did good. So hand tight plus 180 worked that time. All right guys, so got all the spark plugs in, made sure everything's indexed. The line, the gap in the spark plug, and that Sharpie line I put on the plug facing towards the injector, right? So make sure all of them are pointing the right direction. Everything's good there. Especially on salt water, and even Evinrude says do this. I'm going to take this can of Corrosion X, and anywhere that has metal without a layer of oil or something on it like that, some kind of water displacement, we're going to put this on there. So, and I recommend this stuff because it kind of gunks up on there and it'll last longer than most. And it doesn't hurt anything. It's safe to put on anywhere you definitely see like corrosion beginning or that type of stuff. It's a good idea just to touch her up. Like your new plugs, you don't want those just raw metal. So get all that. Let's see what else here. Okay, that side looks good. We'll come over here. All I'm doing is hitting where the new plugs are, so they got something on them. So anywhere I see exposed metal without a layer of protection on it, right? So, I mean, after that, a little sensor, whatever. Sensors are fine to cover in this stuff. It's all safe for electricity, and it ain't gonna burn your boat down. So, anyway, that stuff gets on there and makes a thick layer of grease, and works really well. You can see Corrosion XD Extra Duty. You can kind of see what it does there. And it's the orange can. There's 3 different levels. This is the long-term stuff that's good to put on motors. Anyway, that wraps it up for spark plug, guys. And next I'm going to do anodes. Y'all have a good one.